The symbol of the revolution is a tractor, and this Dutch countryside is where the barricades first went up. Hello and welcome to 10 Walks Explain Everything. This is Nicholas Walton, and this is the third walk of the 10 that I'm using to explain the Netherlands through the agricultural heartland of South Holland. I started off over in Hook of Holland, out on the North Sea, walked along the Maas, past an engineering marvel, and then ended up cutting north towards the beautiful town where I used to live, Delft. And in this I go through this agricultural heartland full of intensive farms, agriculture, lots of big greenhouses, glass houses, full of plants. I can see one there which looks as though it's full of tomatoes, sky high. On the 1st of October 2020, something big happened in the Netherlands. It was the middle of the COVID pandemic. It was a tough time. I remember it well. And the farmers were very aggrieved about a couple of issues. 75 of them were given permits to drive their tractors to the Malieveld in the centre of The Hague. In the event, 2,200 turned up. There were 1,000 kilometres of traffic jams and roadblocks all over the Netherlands. And so began the tractor protests, which have not just roiled the Netherlands since then, but they have roiled the whole of continental Europe. So it seems, just 4 years later, tractors, farmers protesting, this is now becoming something that turned into a revolution. So what exactly were the farmers getting angry about? Well, it's something called the stikstofcrisis. Now that's something that I probably have pronounced particularly badly, but it's a very big issue here in the Netherlands. It's not strictly to do with the climate, but it's very much to do with the environment. It started off over many years when people realized there was a lot of nitrogen and then ammonia being released into the ecosystem. But what made this particularly acute was a government report saying that something finally had to be done, and that put a lot of farmers, especially things like dairy farmers, into the crosshairs. They've become very, very efficient over the years as they've been asked to, but this introduced a lot of problems into the ecosystem. If you have ammonia, then that blocks off oxygen in waterways, and then it inhibits things like calcium being taken up into the food chain. That means, for instance, snails can't grow their shells, and ultimately a few stages up from snails you get birds that have eggs that are too weak because there's not enough calcium, or even their bones are too brittle. So this is something that the government had to deal with, especially when it was close to nature reserves. And what the government did became very, very unpopular with the farmers. After all, they'd been asked to become more intensive, to produce more with less, and then they were the ones that were being asked to sacrifice their way of life. And that's what originally led to the protests. The fact is that there's not an enormous number of farmers left in the Netherlands, maybe 50 or 60,000, but the ones that there are determined to make themselves heard. It's not a question of numbers, it's how many tractors they can put on the streets. The stikstofcrisis has undoubtedly been a revolution in modern Netherlands politics, but should we be thinking about it more as the start of a reckoning rather than a revolution? The Netherlands is a miracle. I'll always make that case. But sometimes you have to look at what it's been built on and ask, how long can this last? You have the intensive agriculture system. You have this land that has been forged out of wind, waves and marshes over a couple of thousand years. Where I'm walking now, this should be under sea level, but it's not, thanks to the ingenuity of the Dutch. This really is a miraculous country. But this is not a normal era. We know climate change is real, and we know that that is going to bring a number of problems. We know that sea levels will rise. Not very comfortable for a country like this, but it's not just the sea levels rising. What if you also have extreme events, extreme weather events inland in Europe, bringing deluges of water down the Rhine and the Maas emptying into the North Sea at the same time as you have a higher sea level, a high tide, a low pressure system in the North Sea. What then does that do to this country? So in some ways, the stikstof crisis, the idea that, hang on, what you're doing worked, at least for the farmers, but there's a point at which we actually have to work out, is this bad for the environment as well? Maybe that's something that the whole of the Netherlands now faces.